On a quiet morning, the small town was shaken by a horrifying crime. A homeless woman was found completely naked inside an abandoned house, surrounded by mysterious books and notebooks written in a foreign language. No one knows who she was or why her life ended in such a strange way.
That morning was not ordinary in the quiet small town, for the appearance of a strange woman caused an unusual stir among the residents. She wandered silently through the alleys, wearing dirty clothes and a face marked by fatigue, as if she had lived 1,000 nights in the open. No one knew where she came from, nor where she went every evening. All that was clear was that she was a woman in her mid-40s, but her mysterious eyes spoke of something much deeper than her age. She began to appear daily in a small restaurant owned by Mr. Abdel Rahim, a kind man known among the townspeople for his generosity. She would sit in a distant corner of the restaurant, order simple meals, eat quietly, then pay the exact amount with strange precision, as if she feared being accused of something. She never spoke to anyone, and no one dared to ask her about her past. As days went by, some restaurant patrons noticed that the woman disappeared every evening, heading toward the outskirts of the town, specifically to a group of abandoned houses that everyone feared. There, in a house without a door, she spent her nights alone. The surrounding houses were falling apart, sometimes inhabited by homeless people or passing workers. But during that period, one of those crumbling houses was also occupied by two strange young men who worked collecting scrap metal and plastic to sell to junk dealers. No one knew much about them, except that they seemed to be 18 or 19 years old, and often returned late at night, burdened with sacks of metal and plastic, their tired faces hiding something unspoken. While everyone watched the mysterious woman from afar, some began to feel pity for her. So one evening, the restaurant's regulars gathered and decided to buy an iron door for the house where she slept, so that she could lock it from the inside and protect herself from any danger. But as time passed, the signs of fatigue began to increase on the mysterious woman's face. She no longer entered the restaurant as before, with silent confidence, but with hesitant steps and wandering eyes. It was clear that the money she had was gone, and she could no longer pay for her simple meals. At first, she tried to hide her inability. Then she began to beg some customers to pay on her behalf. Some felt sympathy for her and paid in silence, while others watched her suspiciously, as if they sensed something mysterious in her story. Things continued this way for weeks, until the woman became a daily topic of conversation in the small town. One grey morning, while Mr. Abdel Rahim was cleaning the tables of his restaurant as usual, he heard strange whispers among the customers. One of them said in a low voice, "They say she's dead. The homeless woman. They found her in the abandoned house." Abdel Rahim froze in his place, and the spoon fell from his hand. Without hesitation, he picked up his phone and called the Royal Gendarmerie, informing them of what he had heard from his customers. Within a few minutes, they arrived at the place, and he personally guided them to the abandoned house near the restaurant. Upon arrival, the officers noticed that the iron door the townspeople had installed a few weeks earlier was wide open. One of them carefully pushed the door and entered, amid a heavy silence broken only by the creaking of the wind between the crumbling walls. Inside, the woman was lying motionless on the floor, completely naked. The scene was shocking and eerily silent. The officers exchanged quick, suspicious glances Then one of them hurried to call the public prosecutor to report the discovery of a body under mysterious circumstances. Within minutes, the place was filled with members of the gendarmerie, and the abandoned house was cordoned off with yellow tape to prevent anyone from approaching. Some of the town's residents gathered a few meters away, whispering anxiously as they watched a scene their quiet town was not used to. The forensic doctor arrived at the scene and entered with steady steps toward the body lying on the cold floor. He examined it carefully in complete silence, then raised his head and said firmly, "The cause of death is strangulation. There is no doubt about it." A heavy silence followed his words before the commander of the gendarmerie ordered the security cordon to be reinforced. Waiting for the arrival of the technical and scientific police to examine the crime scene and search for any evidence that might help the investigation. The body was later taken to the morgue for a full autopsy and to determine the exact circumstances of death, while the investigators began collecting the first observations inside the dark house. The place was desolate, filled with the smell of dampness and decay. In one corner, they found old, dirty blankets and worn-out clothes, suggesting that the victim had been living there for some time. But what most caught the investigators' attention was not the poverty surrounding the place. It was the large pile of French-language books scattered on the floor, along with many notebooks filled with writings in the same language. The investigators exchanged astonished looks. The woman whom everyone thought was just a miserable, homeless person seemed to have been hiding something no one could have imagined. The investigation began directly with Mr. Abdel Rahim and the regulars of the restaurant who were the last to see the mysterious woman alive. They all sat in a small room at the gendarmerie headquarters, anxiety visible on their faces. The restaurant regulars stated that the news had reached them from two young men living in one of the neighbouring abandoned houses, the same two who worked collecting scrap and selling it to junk dealers. They said that the two young men had entered the restaurant early in the morning, visibly agitated, and then told the restaurant regulars that the woman who used to sleep in the nearby house had been found dead. What raised more suspicion was that the two young men disappeared immediately afterward, leaving no trace in the town. No one saw them leave, and no one knew where they went. This led the gendarmerie to consider them the primary suspects in the case. The woman's fingerprints were carefully taken and sent to the National Laboratory of Scientific and Technical Police to determine her true identity. In an effort to understand who this woman was, who had suddenly appeared in the town weeks ago and died under mysterious circumstances. After several hours of examination, the forensic doctor's report arrived, adding even more complexity to the mystery. It confirmed that the death occurred around 2 o'clock in the morning and that the cause was strangulation. But the surprise was that the analysis showed evidence of sexual activity shortly before death, though the doctor could not determine whether it was consensual or the result of assault. Semen samples were taken and sent to the laboratory for DNA analysis and comparison with any suspects later. When the DNA test results for Abdel Rahim and the restaurant regulars arrived, the result was negative, meaning they were innocent of any direct involvement. They were all immediately released. On the other hand, the authorities launched extensive campaigns to search for the two mysterious young men who worked collecting scrap, who had now become the main suspects in the case. They lived in one of the abandoned houses adjacent to the house where the homeless woman was found murdered, and they were the same two who had informed the restaurant regulars about her death. When the fingerprint test results arrived, The shock was immense. The identity of the homeless woman was revealed. Her name was Hind. She was not just a lost woman, but a French language teacher, wanted by the authorities for 2 murder cases and an attempted murder. She lived in a city more than 400 kilometers away from the small town. Before her life turned into an unknown tragedy, Hind worked as a French language teacher. One day, she met a trainer for martial arts who worked for a low wage in a gym. Their story began as a love affair and ended in marriage. To help improve her husband's financial situation, Hind did not hesitate to borrow a large sum from the bank and gave it to her husband so he could open a gym equipped with the latest machines. She began paying the loan from most of her monthly salary. The project succeeded quickly, and the husband began to earn money, and things seemed to be going well. Hind was very close to her cousin, and their relationship was like that of sisters. Her cousin sometimes stayed overnight at her house. As time passed, doubt began to creep into Hind's mind. She suspected that there was an affair between her husband and her cousin, and when she confirmed their betrayal, she made her deadly decision to take revenge on them. One night, her cousin was surprised by a sudden knock on the door. When she opened it, Hind lunged at her mercilessly, delivering multiple stab wounds to her face and chest, leaving behind screams of terror and panic. Yet, her cousin miraculously survived, a scene that revealed the full extent of Hind's brutality. A few hours later, the authorities discovered Hind's husband's body in their home, covered in blood, having received multiple stab wounds in the back inside the bedroom. Hind, meanwhile, had disappeared into the darkness, fleeing to an unknown destination. Later, her cousin confessed that she had indeed been in a romantic relationship with Hind's husband, confirming the suspicions that had driven the teacher to commit her horrific crime. Meanwhile, Hind's husband's 3 brothers were interrogated, but they completely denied any connection to her murder. They provided solid proof that they were hundreds of kilometers away from the crime scene that night, something later confirmed by the DNA results, which all came back negative. A month passed since the crime that had shaken the small town, yet its mysteries remained unsolved. The identity of the killer was still unknown, and the frantic search continued for the 2 young men who had been living in the abandoned house next to where Hind's body was found. They were the main suspects, but they had vanished as if the earth had swallowed them whole. One morning, Abdel Rahim, the owner of the restaurant that the homeless teacher used to frequent before her death, was surprised to see a fish vendor stop his cart right in front of his restaurant. Abdel Rahim tried to persuade him to move it elsewhere, but the vendor stubbornly refused, claiming he couldn't find another spot to sell his goods. That evening, after finishing his work, the vendor left behind a total mess. Piles of rotten fish and a nauseating stench that deeply angered Abdel Rahim. The next morning, the fish vendor returned to the same spot. This time, Abdel Rahim lost his temper. A fierce argument broke out between them, ending when Abdel Rahim stabbed the man in the chest. People rushed to the scene in panic as Abdel Rahim fled to an unknown location. Hours later, the hospital announced the fish vendor's death from his wounds. The townspeople were shocked by a second murder, barely a month after the first. Panic spread once again through the small community. The authorities launched a large-scale manhunt for Abdel Rahim, which went on for days without success. Then, one informant came forward with information that changed the course of the investigation. He claimed that Abdel Rahim occasionally appeared in town at night, only to disappear again before anyone could notice him. The Royal Gendarmerie set up roadblocks at the town's entrances and exits, waiting for any trace of him. One day, they stopped a car driven by a man with a woman in full Islamic attire beside him, her body completely covered. When asked for their ID cards, the driver refused to comply, arousing the officers' suspicion. They noticed that the man didn't appear religious at all, and the car reeked of cigarette smoke. One officer decided to remove the woman's head covering, only to reveal a shocking surprise. The woman was none other than Abdel Rahim himself, disguised as a female. He was immediately arrested. Realizing the gravity of his situation, Abdel Rahim tried to strike a deal with the authorities. He claimed to possess information that could help them find the two young suspects in the murder of the homeless woman, and asked for a reduced sentence in return. After negotiations, they agreed to downgrade his charge to assault and battery leading to death without intent to kill. Abdel Rahim then revealed a crucial detail. One day, before the homeless woman's murder, while he was at his restaurant, the mailman arrived with a letter for him. At that very moment, one of the young suspects passed by. The two exchanged greetings by name, meaning the mailman clearly knew the young man well. That single clue reignited hope among the investigators. The mailman was immediately summoned to the Royal Gendarmerie headquarters. When questioned about the young man, he confirmed he knew him and his family, and even provided their home address in the city they were from. A special task force quickly moved to the location, arrested the young man without resistance, and he then led them to his companion, who was also taken into custody. And so, after a month of uncertainty, the tangled threads of the case finally began to unravel. But the real questions still lingered in the shadows. Did the two young men truly kill Hind? Or were there darker secrets behind this story than anyone dared to imagine? At the Royal Gendarmerie Centre in the town, the two young men sat before the investigators, tension clearly visible on their faces. They confessed that they were indeed the ones who told the restaurant patrons about the homeless woman's death. They said that on that morning, as they were heading to the restaurant for breakfast, they passed by the abandoned house where the woman lived and noticed that the metal door was unusually open. Driven by curiosity, they approached cautiously, and as soon as they peeked inside, they froze in place. The scene was horrifying. The woman was completely naked, lying lifeless on the cold floor. Terrified, they hurried away to the restaurant and told the customers what they had seen. But when the rumours began to spread, they decided to flee, afraid of being accused of the crime. The initial investigation and DNA analysis proved their innocence, as the results came back negative. Then, one of the investigators asked a seemingly simple question that completely changed the course of the case. Did anyone visit the woman at night? The two young men exchanged looks. Then one of them hesitantly replied, "Yes. There was an old man who used to come to her regularly at night. We saw him more than once, and he often came to the restaurant too." The investigators immediately began to follow the lead. It didn't take long to identify the mysterious man. Suspense, a retired teacher, respected and well known in the town. When the news of his arrest spread, shock swept through the small town. No one could believe that the dignified man, known for his good reputation, could be connected to such a horrific crime. In the interrogation room, Haj Hussein sat with feigned composure, denying all accusations. He said firmly, "I am a respectable man, and I have nothing to do with that woman." But the truth did not require many words. The DNA results were conclusive. The semen found on the victim's body belonged to him. When confronted with the irrefutable evidence, his calmness collapsed and his dignity faded. Adjusting his glasses with a trembling hand, he muttered in a broken voice, "Yes, I used to visit her sometimes, but I didn't kill her." He explained how it all began. One day, while sitting at the restaurant, the homeless woman approached him, begging him to pay for a meal because she had no money left. He felt pity for her and paid for it that day. But as days passed, he noticed her begging other customers for food again and again. Then one evening, he offered to give her the money she needed in exchange for sexual favors. She hesitated for a long time, then reluctantly agreed. The interrogation of Haj Hussein went on for days. The old man sat on the iron chair inside the investigation room, surrounded by the piercing gazes of the detectives. He kept repeating the same sentence, in a steady voice filled with defiance. "I didn't kill her." But the investigators weren't convinced. The more he denied, the more determined they became to tear down the wall of silence he had built around himself. They dug into his past, and little by little, his true face began to emerge. Through testimonies from neighbors and acquaintances, a dark image came to light. Haj Hussein was a cruel man, one who ruled his home with violence. He used to beat his late wife for the slightest reason, leaving her without food or water for days, locked inside the house whose walls had silently witnessed her suffering. His children, too, confirmed what everyone had suspected. They had grown up in terror under their father's iron fist, enduring brutal beatings that still haunted them. The investigators confronted him with all those statements. One of them led sharply, "You don't hate women, you enjoy humiliating them." At that moment, Haj Hussein's face changed. His voice trembled, then broke completely. After a heavy silence, he finally confessed. "Yes, I killed her," he said hoarsely. "I couldn't stop myself. I felt anger, power. I don't know why." He admitted that he was inclined to violence against women, that he felt a strange pleasure in seeing them submissive and humiliated. He tried to justify himself, claiming he suffered from a psychological illness and didn't know what he was doing. But the judicial authorities took no chances. He was referred to a psychiatric specialist for a full evaluation. The result was shocking. Haj Hussein was perfectly sane. The doctor described him as a domineering, authoritarian man, not insane, but fully conscious of his actions, using violence as a deliberate choice. And thus, the final mask fell from the face of the man who deceived everyone for years, revealing his true nature at last, not merely as a murderer, but as a monster who had lived among them, disguised as the respected Haj. Haj Hussein had been suffering from diabetes for years, and the prolonged pressures of the investigation had further drained his body and mind. After days of intensive interrogations, the day of the trial arrived, and his weakness was evident to everyone. He could barely stand before the judges to face justice. The trial concluded, and due to his critical health condition, the judges decided to postpone the pronouncement of the sentence in court, opting instead to deliver it later in prison. When the sentence was read to him, life imprisonment, Haj Hussein immediately lost consciousness. He collapsed and fell into a coma from which he never awoke. A few days later, Haj Hussein was declared dead in the clinic. Thus, the curtain was finally drawn on the case of Professor Hind, leaving it in the memory of the town as one of the most shocking crimes, a case intertwined with love, betrayal, and brutality, leaving a lasting mark on all who knew the story. Abdel Rahim, the restaurant owner, was sentenced to 15 years in prison for assault and battery resulting in death without intent to cause it. As for the two young men who played a crucial role in identifying the perpetrator, they were released immediately after their testimonies significantly advanced the investigation.